Good morning. Today is Tuesday, April 12th, 2022. It's 10:02 a.m. and this is a meeting of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. We are meeting this morning to resume our work on Bill H466, an act relating to surface water withdrawals and interbasin transfers. We've been in discussions with various parties at ANR, Agency of Agriculture, and farmers to try to resolve some issues related to the recording and about basically the recording of water usage. We have counsel with us, Mr. O'Grady, to walk us through a new amendment. And I'm hopeful that with this amendment, we will have reached the point at which we can move the bill. So with that, Mr. O'Grady, please, if you could walk us through the amendment, and since it's instance by instance, maybe help us, if you could contextualize it for us. Thanks.
Sure. This is Mike O'Grady with the Office of Legislative Counsel. You, as the chair just noted, had a few different proposals from a few different parties regarding amendment to H466. This is hopefully a consensus. The first instance of amendment is a definition to the change to the definition of surface water. You may remember that the Agency of Agriculture had come in and said that the term springs should be removed because springs are covered under the term groundwater in the groundwater withdrawal program, and consequently there shouldn't be conflict between this proposed withdrawal program and the groundwater withdrawal program. The Agency of Natural Resources subsequently offered to say surface water springs, but then they subsequently advised that you could just remove the term springs because the definition of surface water includes an umbrella clause of all bodies of surface water that are contained within flow through border upon the state. So any surface water spring would already be included for the purposes of surface water withdrawal. Any spring that's under the ground for groundwater would be subject to groundwater withdrawal. And I believe that first instance of amendment addresses that.
Great. Any committee questions on that one?
Yeah.
Senator McCormick.
I maybe have been using a term incorrectly for all my life. Springs that are under the ground. Is there such a thing? I thought the groundwater becomes a spring when it surfaces.
I see your point. Remember going back to the definition of groundwater and the groundwater withdrawal program, it's there to encompass bottled water facilities that basically withdraw groundwater, but some of them do it right at the point where it surfaces. And so that program was intended to incorporate them. This is intended to try to alleviate any conflict between that withdrawal program and this withdrawal program.
Is that satisfied?
No, but I don't want to take up. No, it's not Michael's fault. I'm not satisfied because I don't fully understand it. I'll look into it as we go along.
Moving further down, you're still in the first instance of amendment and you're still in the definition of what is surface water. And specifically, there are 4 subdivisions that are excluded from the definition. And the last subdivision, subdivision D, have previously referred to constructed ponds or other impoundments that are used for irrigation or watering of livestock and that are not subject to the Vermont water quality standards. The Agency of Agriculture wanted to revise that language to be clear that certain irrigation ponds were just not surface water, and wanted, I don't remember exactly their proposed amendment, but the Agency of Natural Resources has recommended, instead of referring to something that is not subject to the Vermont water quality standards, it would be constructed off-stream farm ponds or other off-stream impoundments that are used for irrigation or watering of livestock. Frankly, it still means those ponds that are not subject to the Vermont water quality standard. If you are off-stream, you're not connected to a navigable water. You're not connected to a contributor to a navigable water, and therefore you're not subject to the Vermont water quality standards. It's really just another way of saying not subject to the Vermont water quality standards. It is also a term that is used in the Vermont water quality standards to reference different types of waters that are not subject to the Vermont water quality standards. So it really is, it helps alleviate some concern, but it really substantively doesn't change much in the application of the law.
So it's whatever parties find it more clear.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions on that one?
So moving down into the second instance of amendment, this is in the requirement that persons that withdraw more than 5,000 gallons of surface water register with the Agency of Natural Resources. There had been a prior proposal that it was that over a 30-day period, averaged over a 30-day period. And there was some pushback on that from the Agency of Natural Resources. What they would like to see is that it be 5,000 gallons or more of surface water within a 24-hour period, or 150,000 gallons over any 30-day period. So there's basically, if you're, that would be an average of 5,000 gallons a day, but it allows you to take a broader context of your withdrawal activities and provide that information to the agency instead of monitoring on a 24-hour basis.
So can we do that one again? So
You see it twice again.
what's that?
You see it again, yes.
Well, I just meant that, so the trigger becomes 5,000 gallons within a 24-hour period, or 150 over 30 days.
Yes,
Okay,
for registration.
for registration.
And then moving down into the methods of reporting, remember that a report is required for anyone that was required to register. So a report is required for anyone over 5,000 gallons or more. But then there's different methods of reporting determined by how large a volume you are withdrawing. So the first is if withdrawals of between 5,000 and 50,000 gallons of surface water in a 24-hour period or 150,000 gallons over any 30-day period shall provide either an estimate of total volume withdrawal or provide meter data. So if you're between 5 and 50, you get to estimate or you get to provide meter data. Now there's an important exception that was added, page 2, line 1. That was to basically clarify how agriculture is going to be reporting. And you'll see that, well, before I get to that, for withdrawals over 50,000 gallons, it is 24-hour period or 1.5 million gallons over any 30-day period. Again, that's the average 50,000 gallons a day over 30 days. They have to provide meter data or measure data by a technically appropriate method approved by the secretary. And then you get to the ag reporting, withdrawals for irrigation or watering of livestock of more than 5,000 gallons of water in a 24-hour period, 150,000 gallons over any 30 days. They provide an estimate of the total volume withdrawal based on log records, and then the agency asks that they have the ability to approve that pursuant to a technically appropriate method approved by the secretary.
I think that was, Ms. Gonda was saying, we don't want to get apples and oranges for reporting that are hard to reconcile.
Right, they want a uniform method of reporting. And so they'll set some standards for that.
Mr. Chair.
Senator King?
So all of this is being reported to the Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Natural Resources.
Natural resources.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
I must be, not sure. Can you explain to me the advantage of this? I'm feeling a little thick-headed here. If you're doing 5,000 gallons, and that triggers a reporting requirement, or 150,000 gallons over any 30-day period, what's the value in having those two triggers? Because you can't get to 150 without having exceeded 5,000 in a day, so that's a trigger in and of itself. So what's being captured by the 150,000 that wouldn't be captured by the 5,000 in the 24-hour period?
It really is about how you calculate what you're withdrawing. Other states do very, very similar things, similar standards. So in one day, you only withdraw 3,000, and the next day you withdraw 6,000, and the next day you withdraw 8. Yeah, you're technically supposed to require the 6 and the 8, but if you then have underneath the 5,000, but you're still going to hit 150,000 for the month, that's basically how to bring in the broader context of the amount of withdrawal. And it also helps the purposes of person that has to report.
Right.
If they can just figure out their monthly withdrawal versus their daily withdrawal, maybe that's something that's easier for them to manage.
Okay. So for everyone, other than the provisions now for watering of livestock and irrigation, it's 24,150 or, at 5,000, 24,150, 50,000, 1.5 million. And then within that, we have farming gets this.
Right, so the distinction with farming from the 5,000 and above is that they get to use their log records as approved by the Agency of Natural Resources. That's really the only distinction.
All right, thank you. Right, I was missing that. Thanks for pointing out that based on log records, please. Okay. Any questions from the committee on those sections, those provisions? Senator Starr mentioned to me, and I haven't had a chance since the board to look for it. He said, I think in one place you may have mentioned watering, irrigation, and livestock. And in another place, just one or the other. And I said, okay, I hadn't noticed that, but I'll check in. So I wanted to mention it to you as well. I'm not sure where he might have seen two different references. So I just want to flag that before we're done.
I will check. It's not coming to me.
Flip through, but I don't see it. Anyway, so before we sign off and vote, I want to just double check that one thing. Okay. Pause and look for that. Why don't we just pause so you have a minute?
Sure, I mean, so they're both in the definition of surface water, and what's being excluded, they are both in the definition of withdrawal for the purpose of being used for irrigation or livestock watering. I'm just going to skip over the policy. They're now both in the definition of reporting and the method of reporting.
Well, and it's also possible that he's looking at a version that's not the most current version. But since he has a knack for seeing things, I want to share the question.
Yeah, I don't see that.
Yeah, me neither. Okay.
Maybe one of the advocates online knows where that is, but I'm not seeing that.
Okay. So let's go back to the amendment, and
Okay.
I think that takes us to the third.
Yeah, the livestock watering is literally just the third law. Okay. It's just that they're not right next to each other.
Okay. Great, thanks.
Um,
Good to have extra eyes. Thank you, Mr. Carpenter.
In the third instance of amendment, you may remember that you received some input from the Agency of Transportation and the Association of General Contractors about their concerns about complying with a proactive permit program. So what was built in is on page 3, lines 3 through 7. Secretary shall issue a general permit for the withdrawal of surface water for state and municipal infrastructure projects. The general permit shall establish a rate and withdrawal volume that only requires notification of the secretary and does not require secretary approval prior to withdrawal. So they have requirements under some of their funding programs, federal specifically, of dust suppression. They use surface water to do that. They didn't want to have to apply to A&R every time that they were withdrawing surface water for the federally required dust suppression. So basically, it's going to be a general permit that just needs them to report on their activities, the rate and withdrawal volume.
Thank you.
And then the fourth instance of amendment is the pre-rulemaking process. Advocates wanted input prior to formal APA rulemaking. So Secretary of Natural Resources shall conduct public input and outreach with interested parties prior to initiating formal rulemaking pursuant to the APA for surface water withdrawals as set forth in the permit. And then public input and outreach shall include an opportunity for interested parties to comment on the draft rules for surface water withdrawals. And that is the bill.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Any questions from Mr. O'Grady? Are you going to be able to stay with us or are you leaving?
I'm going to say.
Okay, great. With that, then let's check in with other interested parties. Senator McCormick, do you have a question?
No.
Okay. With that, let's go to Mr. Crocker. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. It's becoming a ritual. We'll try not to exceed the 10 meetings of the original.
Good morning, Senator Gray.
So thanks for coming back. You've seen and heard the amendment. Wondering if you could provide the committee with feedback as to whether or not we've satisfied the agency's concerns and found a compromise language that works for your folks.
Certainly, and for the record, my name is Jeff Crocker. I'm the Stream Flow Protection Coordinator for the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. We have reviewed the proposals and we're appreciative of the committee's accepting the agency's input, and the latest draft does address the agency's remaining concerns. So we're thankful to the committee for their continued work on H466.
Great. Ms. Gonda, do you have anything you wanted to add from the legal side?
Sure, just briefly, for the record, my name is Jordan Gonda. I'm an Associate General Counsel with the department. Just to confirm Mr. O'Grady's point about the removal of the term springs, it's meant not to change the scope of the definition of surface waters, but just to clarify and recognize that there's a difference between withdrawals of springs for purposes of the groundwater withdrawal program. So it was just intended to be clarifying only.
Thank you very much. Have anything else you want to share about the bill, the amendment, before we go on to our next witness?
Nothing else at this time, Senator.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'd like to go to Mr. Patch from the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Good morning.
Good morning, Senator Bray and committee.
So you know what we're doing here? We're reviewing the amendment, trying to see if we've found a spot that also works for the Agency of Agriculture.
For the record, Ryan Patch with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Glad to be here this morning. I appreciate the work of the committee to seek to address the Agency of Agriculture's concern and support and appreciate DEC's work as well and the collaboration all throughout the process of not only the study group, but also discussions around the bill in this committee. For the purposes of clarifying springs, I agree with what DEC shared about clarifying, but not substantively changing the intent. With regards to the metering provision and not requiring farmers to purchase expensive metering equipment to withdraw a de minimis amount of water, we appreciate that change as well. One question I have clarifying wise, sub 2 of withdrawals for irrigation or watering of livestock of more than 5,000 gallons. Generally it's being referred to as the agricultural section, anything more than 5,000, you don't have to meter, but based on record keeping, report to Secretary of Natural Resources. But my question, withdrawals for irrigation, is that agricultural irrigation only, or is that irrigation of other landscapes or other users of surface waters? To me, irrigation certainly covers farming. I wasn't sure if it was intended to be broader than that, so that would be the only question I would have about that subsection amendment. Moving down.
Yes.
It's not specific. So for example, it could be irrigation for golf courses.
Or, yeah, I'm
right.
not sure the intent. I think it
Irrigation
covers farming.
broadly. And I think, I think to be direct about it, the question was raised by the farming community. And so that's been the center of the conversation, but water use is water use. So it's irrigation for fruits and vegetables, or it's to water a lawn or golf course, whatever. Same concern. Let's gather the data so we know what's happening. Anything else?
For digging down into the third instance of amendment, see a general permit being proposed for state and municipal infrastructure projects, and then modifying that is a general permit to establish rate withdrawal that does not require notification to the secretary and does not require prior approval. In trying to articulate to the committee concerns about future permit program implementation that may restrain agricultural activities that are currently allowed and may impact farmers that already have quite a bit going on and are lawfully using surface waters. That we requested language that would reiterate state policy that there is such a thing as not just for the purposes of a general permit for state or municipal infrastructure projects. You know, obviously, I work for the Agency of Agriculture, and so our scope is farms and farming, but articulating that current state policy makes sense in that there is such a thing as de minimis withdrawal, and that's not a withdrawal that would need to be permitted. Appreciate DEC and others articulating well that it's policy, and DEC could take that position during rulemaking and setting the standards of what will be the permit program. From the agency's perspective and collaborating with DEC on a number of different issues, clarity is important about when something does or does not have to be regulated. And so we would still look to see that standard policy statement opportunity option as being included. We think that is important. Trying to dig into this concept, you'll see throughout, Title 10, consent Secretary of Agriculture for rules or standards that would restrain agricultural activities. And when you look to the general permit and the standards that are outlined to be incorporated, including efficient water use and an assessment of reasonable and feasible alternatives. When looking at farms and farming, I understand the current allowances of the state. If you have water within or adjacent to your land, you can take some out, provided you're not hurting downstream neighbors. That need to justify your water use for farming is potentially something that could be burdensome in the face of not having that de minimis allowance. So just trying to articulate efficient standards, like would that require a farmer to retrofit in the future their irrigation system because maybe they could get a more efficient drip system. But just that nexus of after the registration reporting program, when we get to permit program development, we're kind of doing both at once. We've been focused a lot about what are the threshold criteria for reporting, that there's some interplay to the general permit side where we feel that policy statement would be instructive and helpful to ensure that the current framework continues. And then we also, haven't raised this yet in committee, but some of the permit program standards are certainly, I raised these in the study committee, what does that mean, to require efficient use of water? Is irrigation efficient? It can be, but there's certainly a more or less ways of doing that. So all of that trying to say, under the subsection C in the third instance of amendment, I think there's opportunity to make a statement about, de minimis being withdrawals being something that can be allowed without a permit.
Okay. Well, so the general permit is for surface water use for state or municipal infrastructure projects. And I think the parties of concern were contractors plus V-Trans. So I'm struggling a little bit to understand why you're concerned about a permit that's directed at another sector.
No, I don't think, I apologize if I wasn't clear. I have no concern about the permit language there. I'm raising a separate recommendation the agency has made. As an example, within that, I think it's a good thing to say, there are certain rates and allowances in this general permit where a user of water can go up to that amount and they don't need prior approval from A&R to do that work. I think that makes sense. To try to have a parallel statement in addition to that one is what I'm trying to articulate with regards to de minimis withdrawals and their allowance within the bill as proposed. And then when the permit standards I was referencing are not present because this is just at least the document that Mr. O'Grady was working through is the amendments that have been proposed, not the substance of H4, the whole bill but looking into the standards that would need to be incorporated as part of a permit program, which is separate from that instance of amendment that we were describing. So I was describing language that's included in H466, but not in the current amendment language that the committee was looking at. So I apologize if that was confusing.
That's all right, just trying to get clarity on it all. The statement that you're referring to me, combined both a finding and a new statement of policy. And we don't have findings to indicate that modest or de minimis water withdrawals have, no impact and therefore can be allowed even during periods of drought. One of the things I think that we're aiming to achieve ultimately is a better understanding of cumulative impacts.
Right.
So to routinely authorize withdrawals without any review on the part of the department seems like we're undermining the program. So I think now I would say appreciate what you're offering. The other thing is there is going to be the rulemaking, and the agency itself could participate as I'm sure you probably have automatic party status. You could participate in the rulemaking and articulate the concern you have there.
And if it's going to be so small, it's not going to be regulated.
Well, construction is not an ongoing, I think for the most part, construction moves around project by project, location by location, as opposed to a fixed location withdrawing water for a period of, perhaps decades. So I think that was the difference. So the committee's declining to add that language. Mr. Cash.
Senator Bray, if I may, the policy statement or the finding of fact in the policy statement, that language comes generally from the Agency of Natural Resources procedure for determining acceptable minimum stream flows, which includes a statement about a recognition that some withdrawals are so small, even during periods of drought, they don't cause an impact. And further, it includes a statement about if there are cumulative effects, you need to, A&R can require a user to seek permission or a permit from the agency. And so that statement, that language that the Agency of Agriculture has put forward, it comes from current state procedure as adopted by the Department of Environmental Conservation. So I don't see a conflict there in enshrining current state policy.
So I'll look to council. Do you have anything you would like to share with the committee in terms of how we think about that request?
Well, first, unless you follow Maryland's model where every withdrawal is regulated in some way, every other state sets a minimum amount for permitting. And it's usually between 10,000 and 100,000 gallons per day. So I assume the agency's rule is going to fall within that range. So anything below their minimum threshold is going to be effectively unregulated or unpermitted, I should say. The agency has general permitting authority already. They can already set a general permit for certain low flows or certain withdrawals underneath a certain designated amount. So I think the agency already has the authority, and frankly, the permitting structure will set as de minimis anyway, unless they follow Maryland, which Maryland, everything needs to be approved unless it's domestic water or agriculture under 10,000 gallons. So I don't think Vermont's gone the way of every single surface water withdrawal.
So any further committee discussion on considering the addition of the last provision? Chair by Mr. Patch. So respectfully, I think we're going to decline to add that to the bill, but I know there's opportunities, no pun intended, downstream of here where you could make the case for another venue. All right, with that, then let's go to Mr. Rich. Good morning, Mr. Rich, for joining us again. Nature's been helping out with watering lately.
Yeah, it's April. We're not too concerned at the moment with it being too dry. For the record, Justin Rich from Burnt Rock Farm in Huntington and representing the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association. Thank you for sending along the amendments from yesterday. I got a chance to look those over and weed through the legalese as best I can. It's not my specialty. Looking at the new amendment, we appreciate the log records being a replacement for potential metering. That was a big concern for a lot of growers, especially larger growers. I appreciated the language around pond exclusions. A lot of folks have put a lot of money into building their ponds to secure their own water sources. So this allows farmers who have done that to have access to the water that they've essentially created a storage for. And we appreciate the spring language as well to clarify that issue, as was discussed earlier by Councilor Grady. Although looking at the amendments, it seems the 24-hour trigger has been reasserted. And that was a big improvement in the first amendment from last week. So to see that removed is sort of a step back in our opinion. And again, we'll create a situation where a 5,000 gallon or a 5,001 gallon withdrawal on any one day in 1 month will trigger a reporting requirement. When one couples that with there's no distinction between very large waterways and very small waterways in this amendment and in H466 on the whole, it creates an optics problem for growers where someone in the Intervale in Burlington can be watching 500 million gallons of water float by their farm on a day, water a garden hose for 24 hours and have to trigger a reporting requirement is that's difficult for me to sell to our membership as a reasonable approach to solving a problem. I've looked at the language from the Surface Waters Diversion and Transfer Study Group, and it seems like a lot of what they said wasn't actually outlining specific problems, but just generating ideas for addressing potential problems. And that seems to be what H466 is still focusing on. And as a member of a group who will find themselves under a new regulatory scheme, which could theoretically compromise our ability to do our job well, it's somewhat troubling, especially since so much of the language in this bill only cites farmers and those withdrawing water as a part of a problem. We grow food to feed our local communities. Most fruit and vegetable farms are very small, using very small amounts of water in the grand scheme of things. And again, growing food to feed our fellow community members. So there's a little bit of, you won't be surprised in the farm community to feel a little bit under the gun with this.
Okay. Well,
And I think, sorry to interrupt, Senator Ray, just a very specific thing is that just the lack of a distinction between small withdrawals from large watersheds and large withdrawals from small watersheds is especially problematic. And whenever I've spoken with other growers about this, they say, wait, so the Winooski is treated the same as, you know, the little brook up at the top of Appalachian Gap feeding into Molly's Pond. And that's hard to really square for a lot of us in our community. So with those pieces of language in the bill, it's hard for us to really find that this is something we're really excited about.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer any specific questions.
Sure. Well, so are you saying that the 5,024-hour trigger, if you were amending, what would you propose? Well,
the last amendment had 5,000 gallons per day on average for 30 days. So it would require a 150,000 gallon withdrawal per month in order to trigger any requirement to report. Whereas now the way it's written is 5,000 gallons per day or 150,000 gallons per month. And as was discussed earlier by Councilor Grady, they're kind of the same number. You can't get 150,000 gallons in a month without hitting 5,000 gallons in any one day.
Right.
So that to me is a step back. And on top of that, the 5,000 gallons per day number is, again, I don't want to use such flippant language.
I
It's
just,
alarmingly small.
is this, how much do you pay for this water? How much do you pay for water?
I do not pay any direct costs for the water.
So you're taking the water. This is just one point of clarification I need, because I know that I get it. We all use resources. We all own the resources, but there's no fee. You're not paying anybody when you take water that belongs to the state of, is shared by the state of Vermont. Is that accurate?
No, I and everyone on groundwater systems or surface water systems does not pay directly for the water like we are in California or Arizona.
Okay.
That's helpful. I mean, I understand some of this pushback.
Yeah.
But I think we're at again, we're not asking people to start metering at 5,000. Is that accurate? We're asking for a back of the envelope. Is that accurate? That being said, I do understand. I mean, I have not heard yet where our neighbors are, or I may have, but I missed that. But to me, I think we're getting to a reasonable spot. That's what I would say.
I think, so, Mr. Sorry, if we just, I'm happy to come back to you. I just want to check in with Mr. Crocker, who's come back in the
Sure.
street. So my understanding is that part of the, relatively, some people are saying too low a threshold, 5,000 gallons, is that we're really in a study phase of water use. And so we're trying not to miss withdrawals. And that's why the threshold is there. It doesn't imply regulation subsequently at that level. And I think that my sense is that some people are feeling like 5,000 is going to establish the threshold for permitting subsequently. And there is going to be, it's a long way from here to a permitting program. So let me just check in with Mr. Crocker, make sure I'm not misunderstanding the nature of the proposed program and law.
Yeah, that is correct, Senator Bray. The initial threshold is to establish a baseline inventory of the current water use in the state. It's and then take that information to establish regulatory permitting where needed. On some of the issues regarding thresholds of watersheds, those would be set during the permitting program. So the 5,000 within a 24-hour period is just to establish an inventory of water use currently in the state.
Okay. And to Mr. Rich's point that it's, I think we all appreciate it's very different to withdraw from the Winooski at the mouth of the Winooski than it is to be withdrawn from a relatively high altitude stream because of the water volume. But it seems like at this point, again, I want to check my understanding. We're not differentiating those, that rulemaking would differentiate that context, but that in the inventorying process, you're trying to capture all the activity. So you're capturing information regardless of the volume of the source from which it's withdrawn. Is that correct or not?
That is correct, Senator Bray. The issue of threshold size on the Winooski versus a small headwater stream will be worked out in the rulemaking process.
All right, so Senator Campion?
Well, I just want to, I feel like we've come a long way in this compromise, and I'm not feeling as much the other way. It's no, 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 and I'm feeling as though we've gotten to a pretty good spot in what is really a study. I mean, it's an evaluation of to see if we have a situation.
So, Senator Westman.
And I've said that I still, for myself, and I don't know who can provide this, don't really have a good picture of what the other states in the Northeast are doing. Is there somebody that can just
ready to go?
We don't have it with me, but I have a table of about 15 states.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I think the whole committee ought to have.
I can go run and get it now.
We don't have to run and get it now. But
well, I'm thinking
I know the basic numbers for our neighboring states. New York is 100,000 gallons. New Hampshire is 50,000 gallons. I believe Massachusetts is 20,000 gallons a day to report from surface waters. And with all due respect, Senator Campion, we've been described as living in the Wild West of water regulations. I can't really argue that because we are the least regulated compared to other New England and Northeastern states. But the law as it's written now goes from the Wild West to the most heavily potentially regulated of any state by a factor of 4. And earlier, I believe Councilor Grady mentioned that Maryland has a 10,000 gallon a day threshold, but Maryland has 8.5 times the population density of Vermont. So it's, to compare a state like Vermont to a highly urbanized state like Maryland is, I don't know if it's the best comparison for water use and its potential effects. I read an article in Vermont Digger the other day by Kathy Erfer, citing the Ipswich River in Massachusetts as a reason why we need to regulate water withdrawals in Vermont. But the Ipswich is in an extremely urbanized environment, and their main problem is actually groundwater withdrawals, not surface water withdrawals for irrigation or any other purposes. It's just a depressed water table from hundreds of thousands of individuals living there in a shallow water system. So that's just the context I look at from here. And I don't mean to be firing shots at anyone. So I apologize if I come off a little harsh.
No, not at all. We don't know what the water situation is going to be. That's part of why we're doing this. I mean, we don't know as the climate changes what situations we're going to be dealing with. We know that the northern part of the state, correct me if I'm wrong, is technically in a drought. Technically, southern part is not. My understanding is that's one of the reasons we're taking some of these steps.
So, Mr. Crocker, I think a question back to you as a spokesman for the working group. I'm sure you considered many different thresholds. How did you settle on 5,000?
Yeah, we had a long discussion. The 5,000 was settled on as we talked with people familiar with the hydrology of Vermont. So we had a hydrologist on the committee. And as I've shared before, majority had people familiar with the regulated community, such as Jeff Nelson, who testified and really thought that the 5,000 was the correct number, and there was decades of experience around this issue, dating back to some of what went on with the snowmaking rules in the 90s. And the consensus formed that 5,000 really was probably the right number for the registration and reporting program to develop this inventory first to understand water use in the state.
Thank you. What's any further thoughts? I think we've spent an extra 2 weeks trying to move again, study, finesse. I'd like to see if, because we are, in we need to be timely in making a decision on this. I think the only question I've heard is that we need data to answer is, what are other states doing? So I think for the moment, I'd like to propose that we ask Mr. Grady to come back with that data, and we will examine the bill one more time, and then I think we're gonna, it'll be time to fish or cut bait. And in this case, I think we'll need to move the bill. If we make a further amendment, we make a further amendment, but I think we're at the end stage on this. So any closing comments from any of the guests on this? We will schedule it, and if there's any change proposed, it of course gets circulated to everyone prior to a vote. We'll have it on our website, but we'll give it one more look and then make a decision as a committee and then move the bill. But anything that anyone wants to share before we wrap for today on this subject? Mr. Patch.
Thank you, Chair Bray. I wanted to, as I did last time we spoke, we talked about climate resilience and climate resilience planning and the role that this future permit program could play in apportioning water in an equitable way. When I read subchapter 4 in H466, policy on surface water withdrawals for off-stream uses other than snowmaking, and to the question of permit and fees for water use, it's my understanding that ANR's permits are paid for by those that either need to apply or have an impact or utilize it. And so I think there may be a chance where there are farmers that may need to get a permit for surface water withdrawal, that may need to pay for that permit, and snowmakers are not included in that permit program at this time unless they make a change. And they currently do not pay to report or use that water for their purposes. So as far as thinking comprehensively, H466, just to step back, I appreciate that snowmaking is regulated under its own rule. I will have a comment whether the rule works or not, but just to speak to the intent and goal of the bill, it's not going to be looking at every water use at the same time under that permit program.
Well, thanks. I think let me, rather than opine, ask Mr. O'Grady to review for everyone here what rules apply to those who want to use water for snowmaking.
So, Mr. Patch is correct, they do not pay a fee for their approval to withdraw water for snowmaking, but they are subject to the stream alteration permit. They're subject to discharge permits. They're subject to, I think, 2 or 3 other permits, which they all pay a fee for, which farming is actually all exempt from.
So I think there is a much more in-depth regulatory regime that snowmaking withdrawals go through than what's being addressed in this bill, and which at this point is just an inventory, or as Senator Campman said, a study. So I don't want to hamstring this program on the basis of there is the possibility that future permitting will bring costs to people. We are talking about, again, a shared public trust resource being used for private purposes, right? No matter how much we support those private purposes, it is appropriate for us on behalf of everyone to regulate the use and to understand the use. So, okay. All right. So thank you everyone for weighing in. We'll resist the temptation to close the discussion, maybe prematurely. So we'll look one more time at members for other states, and then we'll make a decision, a recommendation to our Senate colleagues, and whatever amendment we end up moving forward, and we'll keep you all in the loop. Thank you very much for participating again. And I would anticipate that we will wrap this up this week, because we're coming into the
What, this week?
yeah,
Bummer.
coming into the end of the session, and it's important for us to be timely. So with that, we are finished with this topic, and we're going to go on to another bill, H715. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. So we don't have Ellen for about half an hour because she's elsewhere. Why don't we take a 10-minute break, and then we'll restart.